We're going to rank every single PlayStation console. Welcome back, it's Rob and Kelvin from the gaming duo. Each of us will be creating our own tier list of Sony's consoles, and at the end of the video, you can decide which tier list you agree with more, Kelvin's or Rob's. Let us know in the comments below. Are you ready, Kelvin? Let's do this.
You're too late. I've already summoned Meteor.
Okay, let's go.
First off, we have the original PlayStation 1, the OG, released in 1995 in the USA and priced at about $299. We have hits like Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Gran Turismo. Like the list is just endless here. Let's talk about this console. What do you think?
PlayStation 1, it's a masterful console, right? I mean, it is the introduction to Sony going into the gaming space, right? And I know it's one of the big ones because it introduces the disc-based kind of like era for us, right? We were introduced to polygons, like 3D polygons. We're having the CD-ROMs now, so it's huge. It's a huge thing for the gaming industry, with the whole, back and forth between Nintendo and Sony. So I think that was a massive part of it. The strong third-party support that Sony had, right? You had Capcom, you had Squaresoft. Those were things that really made what the PlayStation was that time. And obviously the dual analogs was a huge upgrade compared to having no analog sticks whatsoever. So I think this was a big part of what the gaming industry is now. And I think having that strong support for first parties as well really made what the PlayStation is today. And so PlayStation 1, that price tag is pretty solid, $299. Having the games that you just mentioned, I think it's a really solid start to Sony's kind of like gaming history. So this one for me is going to be an A tier.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo what you said in regard to the PlayStation 1. I think it got improved when it did add the analog sticks on the DualShock. I think, without them, it kind of was, there are some things to be desired with that. And we got access to some of the greatest games that we know now, like Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid. The fan base for those are huge. If I do have to knock PlayStation for one thing, it is the fact that the PlayStation 1 did have some issues as far as reliability. I remember, again, it being disc-based. If any of your CDs were scratched or anything like that, guess what? You couldn't really play your PlayStation. Whereas you had the N64 in the same era where you just blew on the console you blew on the cartridge and you were good to go. So I will knock it there. But again, ushering in these serious games, again, not saying that the N64 games weren't serious, but you have these mega big games just because you have the extra storage from the CD-ROM. So I'm going to also put this into the A tier just because of how legendary it is.
I've been here since 8:30 last night, and I'm first in line to get my PlayStation 2.
PlayStation 2 will redefine the entertainment lifestyle.
Expected to be the most coveted gift of the 2000 holiday season.
And the most anticipated home video game in years.
Sony PlayStation 2 will be the biggest thing to come along since TV was invented. The buzz on this product is that strong.
PlayStation 2.
PlayStation 2. Newest, fastest video game system ever.
Let's move on to the PlayStation 2, released March 2000, priced at same price as the PlayStation 1, $299 USD dollars. Rob, what do you think?
I mean, I'm just going to go ahead and put an S tier for myself, just because, like you said, it is the perfect console. It is the best-selling console of all time. And you got to remember the fact, when this thing came out, it was a DVD player. At the time, DVD players were extremely expensive, $200 for a DVD player. Sony said, you know what? You can play games too and have a DVD. Like, absolutely insane value there. So that's what really, really pushed it, because DVD players were really hot at the time. And again, just it pushed the envelope when it came to graphics. And to this day, there are some PlayStation 2 titles that still hold up. It is absolutely insane. I think I actually played Shadow Hearts 2 Covenant, like I would say a year ago, and it was still playable. Not all games are playable, that have aged very well, but for the most part, you can still pick up a PS2 game and you'll be able to play it relatively easy. So the console has aged decently well, and just again, the classics that came out of that one, I mean, you can't really complain. So yeah, S tier, easy.
S tier. Yeah, man. I mean, again, the PlayStation 2 was a huge factor for me as a kid growing up playing games, this was obviously, it is till this day the most selling console of all time. And the fact that it was the leading console that generation had a huge boost over the PlayStation 1. That was huge as well. And like you said, Rob, there was massive titles in that. The DualShock, controller, like you mentioned, having that rumble feature was also an added plus. The fact that you can change your console from vertical to horizontal, vice versa, I think that was kind of cool as well. It just had that like huge boost due to all those things that Sony was implementing and added from the PlayStation 1 onto the PS2. The games, I think, really made this hardware, right? So I echo that. It's going to be an S tier for me. Probably one of the best consoles ever to hit the market. So yeah, for sure. Next up, we're actually going back again with the PlayStation 1 Slim. For some reason, they released that in between the PS2 here, priced at $99 US. Rob, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, not much to say. It just made the PlayStation 1 and made it cuter. You could literally stick this thing in your cargo pants or Janko jeans if you had it at the time. And what's really, really awesome is they had a really great price point at this point. It is $100. Like, that is so easy to give to like your kids or something. Like, and you get to experience all the amazing PlayStation original titles. And at this point, there were so many original PlayStation titles to choose from. So I think the value is there. And I think they fixed with the laser and whatnot. And again, it was just this tiny little thing that you can kind of take to friends' houses if you wanted to. Remember how people had either N64 or PlayStation? This was so easy to just bring with you if you needed to. I think it improves on what the PlayStation looks like. I think they did a really good job of making it slim. Plus, the price is just amazing. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the A tier right next to the original PlayStation.
Yeah, again, like you said, it was a very budget-friendly PS1, and it was a very portable-friendly device as well. So much so that they actually introduced an LCD kind of attachment to it that you can actually play on the go. So again, adding to the portability to it. So again, the slim part of it, everything else is pretty much the same. I might have to agree. I think an A tier might fall pretty well for this, considering it's pretty much the same thing. It's just tinier and cuter, like you said. So yeah, I'll definitely put it in the A tier.
Let's move on to the PlayStation 2 Slim, which again released in November 2004, was priced at $150. Again, following the same trend as essentially the PS1 Slim, lowering that price point, making it way more compact. This thing is tiny. It looks like a little folder. There's not much to hate about this design. But it didn't do anything crazy, right? It was just kind of, and again, this is really late into the game at this point, 4 years later. If you already have an original PlayStation 2, you don't really need to get this thing. But again, it made space in the living room really easy, so that's cool. So I'm not going to put it as high as the PlayStation 2 just because the impact wasn't as crazy. So we're going to put it on the A tier for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo that. I think this was the first part of Sony's strategy of like really introducing a mid-generation cycle, but adding extra features to it. Not like the PlayStation 1 Slim, where it was just basically the same thing. But this one, it was a cheaper option, obviously, but it also added just extra Ethernet ports. So it wasn't anything crazy like how we're seeing in today's age, but it was something extra, right? Everything else pretty much the same. So I'm gonna probably put this at an A tier as well, just because it wasn't anything crazy, right? I think we kind of established that it was pretty much the same. You can't really compare it to the OG PS2, so it has to kind of drop down a notch. Next up is the PSX, only released in Japan on December 2003, priced at $638. This was an interesting one. Obviously, like we said, didn't release in the US, didn't release anywhere else but Japan. It was a hybrid console, so you can use it as a PS2, a PlayStation 1, or it opted also as a DVD player. This was interesting, Rob. What do you think about this one? This one has a different, unique style to it, right?
I got to give it kudos for looks, right? It's a very sick looking console. You had so many ports in the back. I believe you had an HDMI port, a bunch of different inputs. I believe the controller actually hooked up in the back as well. But it was also a DVD recorder. Now, this actually wasn't sold under the PlayStation brand. This was actually Sony selling this console because, again, it was just like, hey, it is a PlayStation, or it's a DVD player foremost that can play PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 1 games. So it was really, really weird, the marketing for this. There's probably a reason why it didn't come stateside, just because it was kind of weird, and it was also very, very expensive for what it was. Again, a relic of its time. I give it cool points, but it's not really substantial in Sony's history. So I will probably put this one, not probably, I'm going to put this one in a C tier for me.
Yeah, I echo everything you said. I think cool points. I mean, this looks ahead of its time, right? This looks really cool. This looks like something that you would kind of see in like the later half of 2000 of some sort, like maybe 2010, around there. Like for me, it has a really cool design, right? And the fact that it's white, it has that glossy look to it. Again, it reminds me of like the PS3, which we'll talk about soon. It's cool factors definitely up there. I'm gonna probably put this at a B tier, just cool factor alone, and the fact that it could, essentially be a PS2, PS1, and it's a hybrid console. So it would have been really interesting to see how it would play out in the US. But unfortunately, we weren't able to experience that.
Sony Computer Entertainment will be launching new handheld entertainment platform in 2004. The name of this new platform is called PSP. Yes, PlayStation Portable. PSP is disc-based platform. A world where all kinds of entertainment, like games, music, movies, are going to be fused together. Same as PlayStation and the PlayStation 2. He is the Walkman of the 21st century.
Yeah, so this is Sony's first stab at the handheld space. It's going up against the Nintendo DS, which was $100 cheaper at the time. But the PSP was like a grown-up console. It's like, this can do so much more than play games, right? The DS can pretty much only play games. You can watch movies on it. You can listen to your music, and you can play kind of like your AAA type titles on this thing, right? That's what Sony was trying to make out this thing to be. But it became a console that was just doing too much, and it got really pricey, right? So you had the memory on there, but it was expensive. I remember the Memory Stick Duo was like the only thing that you really had to get, and it wasn't cheap. Like there wasn't really alternatives you can get. You had to buy like the Sony one. So it was pretty interesting. Again, I love the software on it. You have Final Fantasy Crisis Core 7, Metal Gear Solid, Peace Walker. You had the Acid games. So you had some really cool stuff that's made specifically for this, which is we're going to get to the next console they made, their handheld console, and it had the exact opposite problem. So I give it a B for trying really damn hard to be something, but they just kind of, it was almost there. But they just kind of fell short. So I think this deserves a B.
Yeah, the PSP is interesting. Again, first attempt, like you said, to rival Nintendo, right, which is huge. The catalog of games, I think, stand pretty well for what it was for a PSP, for a handheld device. It felt premium. It felt like you were playing a premium device, right? Obviously, Sony is known for kind of upping up their premium look and based off of price. It was on more of the expensive side compared to like Nintendo devices. But my biggest thing that I didn't like was that it had one analog stick. Very difficult to like really make those, especially like first person shooter games, hard to navigate because you only have one analog to play with. But I did love the cross media bar. The cross media bar was introduced here, and I thought that was a very nice UI, clean, sleek, and very easy user-friendly way to navigate the system. Based off of what I've played and seen, it does try to do too much outside of like the software side of things. And like the hardware itself just feels like they're trying to implement way too many buttons in this small kind of like space. But it did a great job. I'm gonna keep this at a C tier for now.
And yeah, we're just gonna slip right into the PSP Go. Not much to say about this one, Kelvin. I don't know if you want to give it a few words, and I know already know where you're gonna put it.
Yeah, I think it's, we should say it was priced at $249.99, which came out October 2009. Interesting concept. I don't think this was something that anyone really asked for, right? It was almost ahead of its time just due to the fact that it was digital only, having 16 gigabytes of memory. It was priced similar to the PSP, but it just didn't have the PSP titles, right? You didn't have a way, if I understand correctly, a way to play your old PSP titles onto the PSP Go. So you're kind of starting fresh. And so this was a different kind of take for gamers in general, right? You're not really used to the digital library like we are now. And so that's why I say it's ahead of its time. And it was just short-lived. It didn't really have the titles. It didn't really, Sony didn't really push it enough. It had Bluetooth capability, which is great, but again, that one analog stick is still going to get me, right? They're just not really advancing having those two analog sticks. So for me, I am not a huge fan of it, and I'm going to actually drop it down to a D.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's going in the D tier for me for sure. Like, that's not even gonna, beat around the bush there. It's just like no one really asked for this. It had Bluetooth, which is cool. Had a coolness factor because it slid down. Sliding things were just in at that time, right? But it's just there were so many other alternatives at this point that, and again, Nintendo has completely taken the handheld, handheld space by storm. So like no one really is caring about the PSP at any point. So yeah, just kind of like a fumble on Sony's end. So yeah, D tier for that one.
Let's move on to the PlayStation 3, released November 2006 at a whopping $600, $599 USD. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, this is the point in when I was growing up where I was kind of shifting away towards Sony. As a big PS2 guy, love the PS2, but the PS3 actually ended up going towards Xbox. And I think that the hardest thing about the PlayStation 3, amazing console, you have such great titles on this thing, but it was just so expensive, right? At $600, this is people went to consoles because it was a cheap alternative to PCs at this point. This was not cheap. Plus, at the time of HD TVs, when they're first coming out, they weren't cheap either. And that's kind of like the whole lure was like, you get your HD TV and you get your Sony, but like now you're at the package at 2006, you're spending like $1,200 just for this experience. So it's a bit much. The architecture was hard to develop for. So developers didn't love playing with this thing. And eventually they got used to it and like, okay, we can do this. But it took time, They finally updated the DualShock and named it the 6-axis. You had the wireless capability. It had, ability to motion control. So there was some upgrades there, but it was relatively unchanged for the most part. I remember when they first announced this thing, it was like a boomerang that looked really weird, but kind of cool at the same time. But they were like, no, let's just stick to the DualShock design. So that was really interesting. Again, it is the best looking Sony console of all time, right? The design is absolutely gorgeous. For that, it gets an S tier for design, but for everything kind of else, it just took a while for this thing to cook, right? It took a while. And you had the free PlayStation Network. You had free online, right? But it didn't hold a candle to Xbox Live at that point. So this one is gonna get a B, 100% from me. What about you, Kelvin? I know this is a big one in your heart. I know that.
This was interesting. I loved the PS3 for many reasons. I also didn't like it for the fact that it was just a very expensive piece of device, right? I think Sony was trying to do something new, right? They had new architecture there. They had a new cell processor that made it very difficult for developers to like work on, which caused it to not have that many exclusive titles in the beginning, right? I think towards the tail end of the console, it had plenty of exclusives. It kind of got right back on track. But because of that expensive $600 price tag in the beginning, the fact that the cell processor was difficult to work with, it made things difficult for Sony to kind of propel throughout that generation. Free online, that was pretty massive, right? It had free online. So although it wasn't like the most premium product, like how Microsoft was kind of giving you, it gave you just a bare bones online system. You can play online, have a fun time doing that. But arguably one of the best looking like devices, in my opinion. I think the piano black looks gorgeous. The kind of like senseless buttons that it has, like you don't have a button per se, it's kind of like buttonless design. So these were qualities that I really enjoyed. It felt very ahead of its time, again, very premium. I love this console just because I had a great time. I bought this on my own, so I'm gonna really push this for an A tier.
Can't beat it. Now, we can't forget about the Slims. You know, Sony's keeping that trend of creating Slim consoles. I'm just going to go ahead and go. You know, they had the PS3 Slim September of 2009. And it was priced at $300. So we got a huge price cut, which is awesome. But at the cost of it being absolutely hideous. I hate this console so much. I think they took what the PS3 was and they made it so disgusting with that matte black. It's just a bad looking console. Every time I look at it, it is an eyesore for me. The PS3 is superior. The original is a superior design wise. This thing is a D tier for me. It is in Sony's history. I don't understand. So I imagine you feel the same about that.
I actually do. Yeah, this was a very again, like you said, less expensive, a lighter design, but it just didn't look appealing, right? You went from that nice, beautiful piano black to this matte black that it just didn't really do much for me. I mean, you're getting your best bang for your buck. Again, that price is great for it. However, you're dropping backwards compatibility to save the cost. And I feel like that's a very a downgrade compared to what you were using with the PS3, right? So I'm going to also put this at a D tier.
And then we can't forget the Super Slim. They didn't just want to do one Slim. They said, that's not enough. Let's do the Super Slim.
Yep.
And I think we're going to echo the same thing.
Yeah.
Not great. So. Not great. It's the design is just weird. It makes it look older than it actually is. The weird tray type thing was weird. This doesn't scream Sony to me, right? This screams something from like the late 80s at this point. And we don't really need another Slim. You know, no one asked for it, right? I remember when they came out, I was like, this is just, why are you guys doing this? It was $270, so you got a little bit of a price deal. We're reaching the end of the PlayStation 3's life cycle at September 2012. So like whoever got a PS3 has already got a PS3 and that's it. You know what I mean? So this was a weird decision by Sony. So this is going to go 100% a D tier for me.
I love how you basically laid it out perfectly for me. It looks older than it actually really is, and I think that's perfect. This does make it look much older than it really is. I think you like this better than the other Slim and the actual PS3 Slim, which I don't agree with. So I don't know. I personally don't like this model. I actually think it's worse than the actual PS3 Slim model. So I'm gonna bring this at a D tier, but it's gonna be at the very end.
Right, Sony's new handheld console, the PlayStation Vita, is set to launch in Europe at midnight. The device was launched in Japan. Christmas, Sony say more than 500,000 units have now been sold, but it's entering a very competitive market.
All right, now let's get into the handheld space yet again with the PlayStation Vita, released December 2011 in Japan and February 2012 in North America and in Europe, priced at $249 US. Rob, this was a very interesting device. It did feel like ahead of its time, and it was the most powerful handheld at the time. And it finally had the 2 joysticks, right? That was a big thing for me, and it made playing FPS games that much better. My issue with the PlayStation Vita, though, it just never picked up steam when it came to the software lineup, right? I feel like they had some decent software to back it up, but it just felt half-baked, right? You had developers like Naughty Dog who made games on it, or it just didn't feel like they were putting their all, they're putting their resources, their full potential to make the games stand out, right? And so that actually caused the console to kind of lose interest, right? Not that many people bought it simply because it just didn't have the lineup to back it up. On top of that, the gimmicky stuff to it, priced at $250, for me, it just felt a little bit too high. And then having the motion controller and the touch control stuff, I felt like it wasn't really necessary to have that stuff. And so that could have potentially brought the prices down and made it a little bit more enticing. Overall, I think this was a great handheld, but I'm going to keep it in the C tier, just like the PSP, simply because it just didn't really hit home for a lot of the people. I mean, I think if you play that thing now, it feels right. It feels like it hasn't aged, but because of the lineup, it really dropped down in the score here. So C tier it is.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as this console from a design standpoint is perfect, right? It fits perfect in your hand. It has the 2 analog sticks. A lot of newer consoles now in handhelds look very similar to the PS Vita, right? As far as you have a lot of these PC handhelds, and it's taking a book out of this. Just everything about the design of this console for me screams perfection. But you're only as good as your software for the most part, right? And that's something that this console did not have. It had virtually no software. We had the Uncharted, we had Persona 4 Golden, we had Gravity Rush, like all cool games, but nothing that was like you needed to get this game and play it on here. There just wasn't, especially when you had the Nintendo side of things, right? Where it was just like they had so many great software titles for it, where this just doesn't have it, and they're asking you to pay a premium for it, right? I like the design so much that I'm gonna bump it up to where it actually should be, which I think you're on the nose of it putting in a C tier. But it's like the PSP kind of flip-flops, right? Where the PSP had amazing software, but it was its design wasn't that great, right? But you look at this one, the design's perfect, but the software sucks. So it's almost like they should be even, because like they're just flip-flop. But I think I'm gonna give it B at the end of B, just because I think it looks beautiful. So I think that's the best handheld they've ever made.
The demands for a new platform were clear. A reimagination of the gaming experience that has been developer-led, consumer-inspired, and powerfully and thoughtfully engineered by Sony Computer Entertainment. It's designed to make accessing the content gamers love easier than ever.
Thanks.
PlayStation 4. This is the console that brought me back to the Sony ecosystem from the 360 era. This was launched at November 2013 at a price of $400. So they learned from the PS3 about we need to make sure we're cost conscious. We have games like Bloodborne, God of War 2018. Like, I can't tell you the amount of amazing titles that we got from this generation. And from a design standpoint, this is a callback to me from the PlayStation 2 eras. Like, this is for me almost like a reincarnation of the PS2. They just went back to the roots of like, okay, we need to just make sure that what we learned from PlayStation 3 era, what can we do better for the PS4? And they finally updated the controller, right? We no longer have that DualShock design. We now have the DualShock 4 is what they called it. But it had a touch bar, they had speakers on it. Everything about this console was just a knock out of the park. And to me, this one is an S tier, right next to the PS2, just because it's a damn good console. It has so many good games, looks good, and does everything it needs to do right. So yeah, that's where I'm going to put it.
An S tier. I mean, I get it, because you came back to the Sony ecosystem because of the PS4, but an S tier next to the PS2. Interesting.
You gotta get it. It gets an S for design. It gets an S for software. It gets an S for price, right? So for me, I'm like, what's wrong with this thing? There's nothing really wrong with it.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think I'm right there with you, probably a little bit on the lower end. I'm gonna give it an A tier for this one, simply because I think Sony learned from their mistakes, like you mentioned, right, from the PS3 era. I think they kind of played it safe, right? They had a competitive price, which is great, easier architecture, which was great for developers, and then the steady flow of games, like you mentioned, right? God of War, like you mentioned, Spider-Man. Like, there were so many games on this system that it really made it hard for people like you, right, for example, that were on the Xbox side not to play, or at least not to purchase a PS4 at that time. The slow UI, I think, was a big issue for me, for example, because it was just hard to navigate that that system. So from time to time, it just felt very clunky at times. That changed, obviously, once we get to the PS4 Pro, but we'll talk about that in a bit. And then the introduction to PlayStation Plus, that was huge, right? I think that was the start of Sony actually taking online seriously instead of the free PS3 online system that they service that they provided. Now you're actually getting the cool features like Xbox had, right? And you're able to, chat with your friends and have all these really great features that we were missing on the PS3 era. So that really bolstered the ability to play with your friends and play online and just have a better stable connection. So I agree with you 100%. I'm gonna bring it at an A tier. Design wise, gorgeous, like you mentioned. I just think it just fits perfectly for me at an A tier.
Yeah, I mean, this console is just a good console. You just can't go wrong. Now, we're gonna move into this PS4 Slim. Again, Sony's following a suit, but they always gotta come out with this Slim console. This is a step back, in my opinion. It looks pretty bad compared to the PS4. I don't know what it is about them after the PS2. They just are bad at making Slims. I think they all look pretty bad. But great that we got it cheaper, but I think it's a step back for Sony as far as design goes. I'm probably just gonna put this on a C tier just because it's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. It's cheaper, which is great. And if you were on Xbox and you wanted a PlayStation 4, you're like, I tried Xbox One and I was like, I don't like it. Let me get a PlayStation 4, and you got this. This was pretty easy. So
yeah, I echo pretty much everything you said. It's a cheaper PS4, right? It offered a 1 terabyte, which is really nice. And it had the Bluetooth and like more USB ports. That's pretty much it for the PS4 Slim. But I do agree, for some reason, Sony just couldn't at the time find a good middle ground of how these Slim models looked, right? They always looked inferior from their predecessor. So to me, it does go down slightly simply because it just appearance wise, it just doesn't really do anything for me. I did love the DualShock 4, like you mentioned, but everything else I wasn't a fan of. I'm gonna bring it down a few notches, maybe a C tier, like you said. It just doesn't, appearance wise, doesn't do it for me.
yeah, I think C tier is perfect for it.
Now, this one changes things for me. The PlayStation 4 Pro, released November 2016, priced at $399 US. This was the first time Sony actually is doing a mid-gen upgrade, right? Where now you're getting a mid-gen cycle, but now it has improved internals, right? So you have a better processor, you have a better GPU, supporting 4K output, which was, pretty great at the time. And then the biggest thing for me, it ran the UI much faster, much easier. It just felt much more cleaner to navigate, right? And that was a bigger factor for me to upgrade to a PS4 Pro. Not only that, but it also, made the VR titles a little bit better. So overall, it really bolstered that console to a better, experience. Design wise, I think it looks great. It doesn't look as good as the OG PS4, but overall it does have a pretty decent design. So I'm gonna put this at an S tier. I think it just improves on the PS4.
Crazy take.
So much more that, like you said, what's wrong with it? What is wrong with the PS4? Nothing, right? The PS4 Pro just does that much more to make it better. So it has to deserve an S tier.
I think I was originally going to put this in the B tier, but you kind of convinced me maybe it does belong in an A tier, just because the pricing is great for it. I can't argue. So I believe they announced the PS4 Pro and the PS4 Slim kind of around the same time, and they released right around each other. And they said, you know what? We're going to knock down the price of the regular PS4. So the Slim's going to be $300. So if you want a Slim, PS4, $300. And they're like, but if you want to pay the same price as a regular PS4 Pro that was originally, you're going to get a way better console. Mm-hmm. And it's pushing the envelope when it came to performance. When you booted up a later title for the PS4 sounded like a jet engine. It was screaming, right? But you put in the PS4 Pro, it looked beautiful and it played games the way it was snappier, it was quicker, it was just, you could just tell it was just an upgraded piece of tech, and it wasn't an awful bang for your buck, right? So like, it was almost worth the upgrade to like you did, right? So you couldn't really be like, and it's accessible, right? When we go down later to this list, there's a couple of missteps with that, but they did a really good job with hey, this is better, but we're not going to make you pay too much more for the performance. But it is better, so we're giving incentive to upgrade because our price is kind of low. It looks kind of ugly, in my opinion. I don't love the design for it, but I mean, design for consoles is nothing. You know, you can't really just. They're all boxes. At the end of the day, they're all just boxes. So I will actually put this in the A tier.
Nice. There you go. I love that I convinced you at least a little bit. You know what I mean?
You know what you can't convince me to get, or you couldn't convince me to get? The PlayStation VR original, released in October 2016. It was priced at $400. What did you think of this thing?
I don't have much to say. I didn't have one growing up. I didn't have one when it came out. So for me, this was more of a secondhand kind of like seeing other people's reactions. It did have a good lineup of games in the beginning. I think, it had Astrobot, it had the Resident Evil Biohazard, which was pretty cool. Moss, there were, Beat Saber. There were a lot of cool games that utilized the VR aspect to it. But the fact that you had so many things tethered to it, right? You had a bunch of cords just to connect this thing. You also had the PlayStation Eye. You also had the PlayStation Move. Like, there were so many gadgets that you needed in order for you to even utilize this thing on top of having, the console itself. It just made it seem way more expensive than it really needed to be. The lineup of software wasn't all that either. I mean, I mentioned a bunch of other games, but it just, to me, wasn't enough to really make this purchase worthwhile. So I wasn't a fan of it. So I think at the end of it, I'm just gonna put this at a D tier. I wasn't a huge VR fan. Didn't really do much with the lineup of software. I'm gonna keep it at a D tier.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to say. D tier, easy. Too expensive. You needed a bunch of different things to make it work. There wasn't really great software for it. Again, for VR is a tough sell. And at the time, if you wanted a VR headset, just get an Oculus. Right at the time, that was really again, this is Sony trying to hop on a trend, and the trend wasn't really there, unfortunately. Design wise, I don't love the design of it. Again, it looks kind of clunky, especially that you had to use those two move by the move, and it was just, I don't think it was for everyone. So for me personally, it goes in a D. Bring us to PlayStation 5, Kelv.
Here we are, current gen PlayStation 5, released November 2020, priced at $499, or the digital version at $399 US. I'll have you start. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so PlayStation 5 really is a console that cemented even further what I loved about Sony. It's just a good console, and I'm gonna go ahead and say, like, awesome job on them creating two SKUs at launch. You have the digital version, which was $400, so they're still keeping in line with the PS4 at launch. And then if you want the disc, you get $500. It's $500. And then they changed the DualShock 4 to the DualSense, and the DualSense is such an amazing controller. It is fantastic. It is an absolutely fantastic controller, the best Sony controller to date. So kudos to them for creating that. And then looks wise, a PS5 looks like it's a sick looking console. Now, it is huge. It is massive. That is my number one complaint about it. It is a beast, right, of a console. And I love standing it up, but it looks insane when you stand it up because it's just ridiculous. It's just huge. It's huge. You can't really do anything about that. But it has games like Returnal, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, Demon's Souls Remake, all of these great, amazing games, and they all look great, right? So like the PS5's performance is amazing too, but this console for me keeps me in the Sony ecosystem. I want to use it, and this is probably the most I've used a PlayStation console in a very, very long time, and I have a PC. So I'm gonna put PlayStation 5 at an S tier right now because
S tier.
It is a damn good PlayStation console. There's really nothing wrong with it. There's virtually nothing wrong with this thing. So yeah, it goes in the S tier.
Yeah, it's a great system. I love the PS5. The PS5 is extremely powerful, right? Running that 4K 60 frames per second support. The DualSense you mentioned it is my favorite controller and is arguably Sony's best controller, like you said. I love everything about it, so much so that I began collecting DualSense controllers at this point. Like, I'm not sure how that happened, but it just happened. Just because I love the design, I love what they were, releasing for them. So yeah, overall, the DualSense is probably my favorite controller right now. And then the first half of the PS5 had great titles. I will say that. You mentioned a couple there, but we're at the later half of PS5 right now, right? This is the current gen right now, and we're not seeing the amount of first party titles that we saw on the first half, and so that concerns me a little bit. Design wise, I think, to me, it looks great. I love it. I love the sharp angles. I love the white, the blue, the black. It kind of feels like symbolic to Sony now. Like, you kind of see those three colors, you think of Sony, right? But I also like the design because it just feels like Sony coming from the PS3, coming from the PS4. Like, it's a very bold move for them to do, right? It's very tall. It has like these, it towers over a bunch of other stuff that I have. But to me, I don't mind it. I will say it is kind of bulky, but that's why we have the PS5 Slim, which we'll talk about in a second. But I love the PS5. It is my favorite console so far, and I'm going to put this at an A tier just because, like I said, the other half that we're currently in right now of the generation right now, it just doesn't feel like we have the AAA titles to support the PS5.
Very well said. We're going to take a break from the PS5 and we're going to talk about the PlayStation VR, released in February 2023. Was priced at $550, had titles like Horizon Call of the Mountain, Resident Evil Village VR mode, couple other things. Let's get this out of the way. Console's way too expensive. This thing was way too expensive, right? You can't tell me that I'm just going to buy a $550 console and then buy a $500 PS5 and then I'm going to get a mid experience, right? And there's nothing title-wise or software that you need to play. Like, it costs that much. I'm going to give it points because it looks awesome. It looks sick, right? It looks like the cyborg, like, VR that they would put in the video games were like trying to do like a VR thing, right? Like, that's literally what it looks like. And it's really cool. It looks futuristic. I love the controllers for this thing. But that price is crazy. I think $300 would probably get people in, even $400 pushing it. But I think that probably would have been the right move. But they don't have the software to support this thing, right? So that's the whole thing with VR. So I'm going to put this thing in the D tier right off the jump, just because VR is really, really, really tough to do right now. Again, there's just better options available to you. Yeah, D tier goes.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think it's going to be on a D tier for me too. The look of it looks great. I think it looks really cool. But the software, man, the software was not able to back it up on top of the price. And again, we talked about this on the first one, the VR one, where although it wasn't as tethered, right? This one didn't have as many wires attached to it. It also it was expensive, right? When you had to purchase a PS5 on top of the $550 VR to, purchase, that adds up. And so if you don't have the software to back that up, it's really a dying system at that point. So for me, it's going to be in a D tier. Not much else to say. Everything else looks cool, but and obviously we know that Sony stopped supporting this thing, so it just didn't live up to what the expectation that they wanted. So D tier.
Moving on to the PlayStation Portal, released in November of 2023, priced at $200. Let me go ahead and say, for the record, I was making fun of this thing when it first came out. I was like, that's so stupid. It's a screen with a DualShock or DualSense put in half. It's cut in half. It's this is dumb, right? And it's all I could do is remote play. My buddy got it a few months later after it released. He's like, you should get this thing. It's really, really cool. So I was like, you know what? Let me just take the dive. I cannot tell you how my tune has changed for this console. I love this thing. I use it every single day. It is a phenomenal console. The pricing, yeah, it's a little expensive for what it is. I would even say 150 is just like absolute perfection, but 200 you can swing. 200, and you can play literally your PS5 anywhere in the house, right? I think you went somewhere far away and it worked. You'll tell me that in a sec, but it was just an absolute. It's just get it. If you have a PlayStation 5, get this thing. It is the best accessory for it. Bar none. Yes, it does have missteps. There's no Bluetooth. That's because Sony wanted to push their headphones that they wanted to buy exclusively. But you can just put a headphone. It has a headphone jack. So win. Yeah, we have a headphone jack back. So I cannot express to you the amount of how easy it is. You just press X and you're in. You're playing your PlayStation 5. And there's virtually no lag. Like it is a console that is at the perfect time right now. It doesn't feel like it's before its time or ahead of its time. It's perfect for where it is right now. And I'm gonna give this an S tier. I think honestly they should make a package where they sell you a PS5 Slim and a PS Portal and just price it for $600 and you have the full package, right? This should come with every single PlayStation 5, honestly.
Wow. S tier, man. S tier
for the Portal. Yeah, it is that damn good. Go buy one right now.
Yeah, I love the Portal, man. This is such a game changer for me. It has increased my playtime significantly, right? I think for the most part, it is very simplistic. It has it kind of follows suits of like the Switch of like you just pick up and go, right? I can play this thing anywhere I want. I have traveled to Mexico City. I've traveled to, Wisconsin, and everything worked perfectly fine. Like I had little hiccups here and there, but barely any lag to the point where I was able to play my games and have a great experience. What a treat to just try to play my games on the go, having my PS5 at home and just having the catalog of games that I have on my PS5 system, right? And then you can just play them whenever you want. I will say, I don't think it's as perfect as Rob is saying, right? The fact that it doesn't have that Bluetooth support, it kind of sucks, right? But I'm hoping in the future they add that Bluetooth support so that you can use anything, and that would really bump up my score. I agree, man. Everything you said, I truly agree. If they bundle this with a PS5, I think that would be amazing. The price, I think it's great. I think it's okay for what you're having it for. I'm going to put this at an A tier. All right, next up is the PS5 Slim, released November 2024, priced at $499 USD. Not much to say. We talked about the PS5. This is no different. It's smaller. It has a bigger SSD drive and more ports. If you like the slimmer side to it, I think it's great. Again, we talked about the PS5 in depth here, so I'm going to keep it at an A tier with the PS5. It's just a skinnier version of it, and that's always a great thing. So what about you?
The PS5 Slim for me is interesting. They got rid of my number one complaint about the PS5, and it was that it was so big. Right, so they really did it. But the pricing is, they could have done better with the pricing in my opinion, for a console that's already been released for 5 years already at this point, or 4 years when it released. I don't see a point in upgrading to this thing. If you already have a PlayStation 5, there's no reason to get a Slim, in my opinion, unless you really hate the space. So I'm also going to put it in the A tier just because it does nothing wrong and they improved on the design of it, in my opinion. So I guess I will put this as the A tier. So
nice. That's
what I'm doing.
Rob, take us home.
Latest console, we have the PS5 Pro. It is priced at a whopping $700. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm not the biggest fan of these Pro consoles. Kelvin put one as an S tier, which is crazy. But this thing has yet to be proven, right? We haven't had a game that is really pushing it to make you want to upgrade. I've seen a bunch of YouTubers and videos that kind of did a comparison about, is it worth it? And from what I gather, it's really not at this point in time, unless you're like, you really want to the top of the line thing, and you want the latest tech, then sure, go for it. But you're going to have a TV that's going to support this, or one that supports this. It is $300 more than the OG PS5 digital, right? So I'm like, is it really that much? Is it worth that much more for the enhanced performance? Like, I don't necessarily think it is. So because it's yet to be proven, I think I'm going to put this in, it feels bad, but I want to put this in the C tier because I think it came out just a little too early. I think it's a little preemptive. So okay. C tier it goes, but I might bump it up depending on the games.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. This is probably one of the first mid-gen bumps that we've seen that is such a, in comparison to the PS5 Pro, for example, the price is significantly higher in comparison. So that was a shock to see, right? The big thing is, right, it's improved on the GPU, it's improved on the SSD, it's giving you that ray tracing capability, introducing the PSSR, the pisser that people like to say. And so it does have a lot of under the hood, right? It's a lot of games take advantage of it. However, like Rob said, like you said, Rob, there's not, comparing both the PS5 and the PS5 Pro, it's hard to really see the differences between the two. Right now, if you have a pretty expensive TV that utilizes these capabilities, then you might be able to see it. But if you don't have the up-to-date, the latest TV model, it wouldn't really be wise to purchase this stuff. Now, it is a great piece of technology, probably the best or probably the most powerful console out there at the moment. But the fact that it doesn't have a disc drive, plus being like $700, I feel like it's kind of taking a step back. And for that, I'm gonna probably put it at a B tier, just because of it's pushing the envelope when it comes to technology and pushing for GPU and CPU. It really depends on the audience, right? It's not for the general mass audience. It's more for the techie person that is like into the latest and greatest, right? If you're not that person, the PS5 Pro is not for you.
And there you guys have it. We have completed our tier list of all of the PlayStation consoles. Do you agree with Kelvin's list? He likes a lot of his games on A tier. There's a lot of consoles on A tier.
There is.
Do you agree with my list, which is a little more well-rounded, a little more balanced there? But again, we'll show them here again, Kelvin's or mine. Please let us know in the comments below which of the tier lists do you guys agree with more. And please don't forget to subscribe and follow our channel. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you on the next one.